Hello, and welcome to Walking with the Tengu, a podcast exploring classic texts for the modern martial artist. I really appreciate that each and every one of you has chosen to join me on this walk. You've probably heard a thing or two about the philosophy of the Bushi or warrior class of Japan. In the opening of the Hagakure, there is a line that's often translated, "The way of the samurai is found in death." In the Stoic philosophy, there is a concept of memento mori, which is remembering that we all must die. We see this in the words of the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who says, "I cannot escape death, but at least I can escape the fear of it." And in Marcus Aurelius, "Let each thing you would do, say, or intend be like that of a dying person." While some may see this on the surface as an obsession with death, in reality, it is meant as a mental tool to help us get the most out of life. If you don't keep in mind the inevitable fact that you will someday die, it's entirely possible to waste your entire life, always putting off to tomorrow the things that need to be done today, so that suddenly you find yourself at the end of your life. Unlike most other things in life, time is the one resource you cannot get more of. Again, from Marcus Aurelius, "It is not death that a man should fear, but rather he should fear never beginning to live." Every second that passes is a second closer to the moment of our death. This is not meant to be morose or nihilistic, but instead inspiring. Again, from Seneca, "Let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books each day. The one who puts the finishing touches on their life each day is never short of time." Naturally, Daidouji Yuuzan had some thoughts on how we should face these moments. So let's return to the Budoushoshinshu. If you go back to earlier episodes, you should find them easily labeled if you want to catch up on that text. As a reminder, it was a text meant for the instruction of young samurai class boys. All right, so the first quote from this chapter of the Budoushoshinshu is, well, it's not exactly a quote. Let me paraphrase it for you. "A warrior, whether high or low in rank, should first in life think about the quality of the moment of when they die. It doesn't matter how good we are at life, our job, or martial arts. If we're so consumed with fear at the end that we face our death poorly, all our prior goodness in life is meaningless," according to Yuuzan. He says that this kind of person will be scorned by people of understanding, which is a great shame. Now, none of us will ever be samurai, nor do we live in an era where our peers have a tendency to view honor as a trait worth pursuing. However, that doesn't stop us from choosing to live our lives for ourselves in this way today. So if we listen to Daidouji Yuuzan, the value he is espousing is that we should care about dying well. And what does that mean? For me, dying well means to die in a manner and for a reason that is worthwhile. That could be to save another person's life, particularly for my family. As a husband and a father, it is my greatest calling in life to sacrifice everything and lay down my life for them. Yuuzan defines the rewards of this attitude as, if we go out onto the battlefield, committed to dying out there, then we will be able to, 1, commit feats of martial excellence, and 2, establish our name in history. So we might say that Yuuzan sees this attitude towards death as enabling us to do great and brave things in combat, and thus be remembered for these deeds. If we're committed to this attitude, then Yuuzan says that when we come to our moment of death, even when we have suffered defeat with calm bravery, he says that when our enemy asks our name before cutting our head off, we should give it clearly, laughing coldly, and inviting our enemy to finish the job. We are to show no sign of being afraid of death. Now, I know very few of us are going to ever face having our head cut off. It wasn't exactly a daily thing in Yuuzan's day either, but it was possible. To be fair, we may someday face something similar. There is still evil out in our world, and I've had friends from parts of the world where they had to hide on the roof while men with machetes search for them room to room. Terrible things still happen, and we can't know exactly what we'll face. Just yesterday, 5 minutes from my house, a brown bear mauled a hiker. I don't think they set out that morning expecting to meet a grizzly bear. Maybe they should have. I don't know. That's a force and power that no human can face on their own. It makes me wonder what I would do if one, that is a grizzly bear, charged my family. It would be my job to stand in between and die, if only to give them the chance to escape. Can I face a charging grizzly, as Yuuzan suggests? Can I give him my name, laugh coldly, and invite him to finish the job? Yuuzan continues to say that in a similar manner, if we are wounded to the point of death, we are to speak to our comrades, ignore our wounds, and treat our death as if it were an everyday thing. Again, can we face death in that way? If that bear tears me apart and I'm sitting there holding my innards in while speaking to my family one last time before dying, could I be that calm, not begging and pleading for them to help me, but accepting the manner of my death calmly, knowing that I had done my duty as a husband and father? Maybe. I hope I never have to find out. But it's better to think of these things now and be more prepared than to pretend it could never happen and find out in the moment with things at their worst. What would I say to them in those moments? Any last parting words, wishes, goals, advice, proclamations of love? It's hard to say, but something worth thinking about. Now, Daidouji Yuuzan was born decades after the Battle of Sekigahara, which is largely considered to be the beginning of the Tokugawa shogunate and the ensuing, air quotes, peace that comes from brutal totalitarian rule. It's not that all the fighting was over, but it definitely began its decline. By the time Daidouji Yuuzan was born, Japan was a quieter and more peaceful place, as long as you paid your taxes on time and didn't question the government. Raised by warriors and among a people that still bore the scars of long warfare, some of those generational lessons were passed on, and we see that in this chapter. However, Yuuzan also recognized that facing the battlefield wasn't really as big of a concern for the warrior class of his day. So what's a samurai to do? With no glorious battlefields to die on, how do you then face death? Yuuzan uses the example of contracting a terminal disease, which is something any of us can still face today. He exhorts both the young samurai and the old to treat a terminal illness, unresponsive to treatment, with the same attitude as the battlefield. It's not having the least bit of anxiety over worldly concerns. And, he's right. Whether it's on a battlefield or in a sickbed, how we approach death is the same. I know. There's all sorts of cultural stigma about dying of old age or sickness instead of gloriously on the battlefield. But the more I think about it, or I should say the more I think about this, I think Daidouji Yuuzan may have found the right balance. He talks about the commitment to dying well in combat. The function of that is how we approach and behave in the face of death. It's not that dying sick in bed is less glorious than dying in the battlefield. Sure, there are less opportunities to die for someone else, but the manner of our death can be conducted in the same way, with calm and with bravery. Now, I'm sure Yuuzan and I do not share a similar theory of post-death existence, though we may all agree it will, for each of us, be our last great adventure to sail into the unknown. Whether or not you believe we go into nothingness or into something, how we face that is something we should all consider, and Daidouji Yuuzan exhorted to his pupils that these characteristics, even in the face of a terrible and painful death, would be a calmness and an attitude of everyday occurrence. And is that not so? Every day, people die, some for terrible reasons, a very few for good reasons, and probably most for no particular reason at all, other than that it is an end to their time of life. As Yuuzan tells us, it is an everyday occurrence, and so should we treat it. The problem, though, is that many of us spend our entire lives ignoring death. We distract ourselves from any sight, sound, or even mention of death. Now, this is subtle because, yes, we'll see killing in movies, video games, read of it in books and the like. And maybe I shouldn't say killing, maybe just death. And a lot of it is killing, but death in general. But we don't really think about it. When was the last time you saw an actual dead body? Unless you work in emergency services as a first responder or in the military or live in certain third world countries, you probably don't see that many corpses. Health reasons aside, we're very careful in today's day and age to shelter ourselves from seeing death. Try talking about death with your friends, and the conversation will be considered awkward, usually. Yet, we're constantly surrounded by it. Car collisions, cancer, obesity, heart disease, and many other so-called killers lurk in the corners all around us. We just distract ourselves by acting like we're going to live forever. Now, I'm sure if any of us were directly to ask if we thought we're going to live forever, we'd laugh it off as silly. But that's a very different thing from acting like it. Unless forcefully confronted with it, many, if not most of us, rarely consider death on a daily basis. We'd have to, like mentioned, be in some position where we see death often or be living in one of the combat zones around the world. I've had my share of dead bodies over the years, and more than once, as I stood over a corpse, I would look down into their face and think about their last moments. My first was a woman who overdosed on someone else's medication and died in her sleep, alone, on the concrete of a back alley behind City Hall. There were people walking to their jobs that morning. By the time I saw her and stopped to check on her breathing, rigor mortis had already set in, which meant she had likely died a few hours earlier in the night. This is Alaska, and it gets cold here, but it wasn't that cold that night. In the 40s Fahrenheit, which would be roughly, I think, 5 to 7 degrees Celsius, not freezing, just cold. But between the medication this woman took and the cold concrete she was laying on, it lowered her body temperature and combined with whatever other health complications she was experiencing, and she died. Maybe if someone had stopped earlier that morning to check on her, she would have lived. In the end, she didn't, and it took a very long time to find her family. All the other people who knew her only knew her by her so-called street name. As far as ways to go, it really wasn't that bad. Dying in your sleep is pretty peaceful compared to the others I've seen. Now, I'm not blaming anyone that walked on by. She just looked like she was sleeping peacefully in a corner. And who really wants to wake up a street person? For all you know, they're crazy and are going to attack you for no particular reason. But I still wonder, what if someone had stopped earlier? Could she have been saved, or would have just put off the inevitable a few weeks or even just a few days? Or would a few days and a few weeks have been what she needed to finally get help and get better? We'll never know. But when you see real death, these are the thoughts that at least I think about. And that is what Daidouji Yuuzan, at least in part, and myself are suggesting. We need to be consciously aware of death today, and then not waste today, for we are not promised tomorrow. I'm reminded of the verse from the book of Proverbs, chapter 13, verse 14, that says, "The teaching of the wise is a fountain of life, that one may turn away from the snares of death," which is basically just telling us that wisdom doesn't lead us to destruction. When we look at a person's life, it can be pretty easy to look at their life choices and say that they are dancing with death. So we should be surprised when a person who makes, or I should say, we shouldn't be surprised when a person who makes certain choices ends up dead, which in the end is a useful rubric for determining the value of something we're being told. Wisdom leads us into a full life. Anything else traps us in death. Others have thought about facing death. In fact, one could argue facing death is an experience that everyone shares, We can find writings on death in many cultures. In the Hávamál, a collection of Old Norse poems, we find 2 verses, numbered differently depending on which translation you're using, typically in the mid-70s. Your cattle shall die, your kindred shall die, you yourself shall die. But the fair fame of him who has earned it never dies. And the next, your cattle shall die, your kindred shall die, you yourself shall die. One thing I know which never dies, the judgment on each one dead. Like Daidouji Yuuzan, these words tell us that death is inevitable, and that your deeds are what will be remembered, and that what you do will be how you will be remembered, how you'll be judged. Like the samurai and their often over-romanticized daily awareness of death, we also find a daily practice known as memento mori, a Latin phrase which means remember that you have to die. The concept has its roots in the philosophers of classical antiquity, particularly the Stoics and Christianity. From the medieval period, we see numerous references to it in architecture and funeral art. So I wasn't entirely surprised to find that Seneca the Younger, most commonly referred to simply as Seneca, a Roman philosopher, had written an essay titled On Old Age. I would encourage everyone to go out and read it. There are lots of free versions. You can find it free on Kindle and a bunch of other places. But while reading it, a few quotes stood out to me. First is, when someone asked him why he consented to remain so long alive, I have no fault, said he, to find with old age. That was a noble answer and worthy of a scholar, for fools impute their own frailties and guilt to old age. End quote. As I am a martial artist who is definitely feeling his body age, I simply cannot train like I used to without injury. This makes me cautious of blaming my old age for the attitude that I take to training. If I have the attitude of this man, that I have no fault to find with old age, maybe that'll bring a different attitude to my training. Next quote, the great affairs of life are not performed by physical strength or activity or nimbleness of body, but by deliberation, character, expression of opinion. Of these, old age is not only not deprived, but as a rule, has them in a greater degree. This brought a new layer of texture to what Daidouji Yuuzan was writing about concerning the doing of great deeds on the battlefield. Simply having strength, agility, and the energy of youth does not mean by the simple act of possessing those traits that we will use them in a worthy and honorable way. Seneca here says that the great affairs of life come through our character and commitment, which might, in a sense, be in line with Yuuzan's application of his warrior ethos to dying in a time of peace. As Seneca points out, typically, if you get to old age, you're more likely to have had the chance to hone these traits that really matter. All right, next quote. Shall we not allow old age even the strength to teach the young, to train and equip them for all the duties of life? And what can be a nobler employment? End quote. So obviously this speaks to the value of teaching, passing on your martial arts skills to the next generation. This is a noble calling. And the next quote, and yet that same failure of the bodily forces is more often brought about by the vices of youth than of old age. For a dissolute and intemperate youth hands down the body to old age in a worn-out state. Here again, like that proverb I quoted earlier, wisdom is a fountain of life, saving us from the traps of death. We should remember to not waste today in frivolous, short-sighted things. Our poor choices in our youth, or today, dictates the state of our future, as opposed to old age. And the next quote, my dear Aurelius and Scipio, we must stand up against old age and make up for its drawbacks by taking pains. We must fight it as we should in illness. We must look after our health, use moderate exercise, take just enough food and drink to recruit, but not to overload our strength. Nor is it the body alone that must be supported, but the intellect and soul much more. For they are like lamps. Unless you feed them with oil, they too go out from old age. And this is why I do this podcast. Even if no one listens, it is training for my intellect and my soul. I'm feeding that oil into the lamp. Just as we train our martial art for the refinement of various traits, we must not just train our bodies. Hone your mind and your spirit too, or it will atrophy quicker in old age, as do our bodies when we stop using them. All right, one last quote here from Seneca's essay on old age. What is the point of all this? It is to show you that if we are unable to scorn pleasure by the aid of reason and philosophy, we ought to have been very grateful to old age for depriving us of all inclination for that which it was wrong to do. For pleasure hinders thought, is a foe to reason, and, so to speak, blinds the eyes of the mind. It is, moreover, entirely alien to virtue. So what was Seneca's point in this? As we approach old age, we must nourish our body as well as our mind. The frivolous excesses that are possible in life, whatever pleasures we might enjoy out of balance of what is good, serve only to blind us to our own coming death. So let us expend our lives, that is today, in something worthy, something honorable. Let us think often, clearly, and soberly of our coming death, and let that serve as the motivation to do more with our lives today. I say it often to myself and my children, and I say it now to you. You are not promised tomorrow, so do not waste today. As always, remember to not just talk about philosophy, but like your martial art, live it. Please help the podcast out by sharing and telling people about it. The best way you can help us is by letting people know that it's out there and what it's got you thinking about. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon.